It starts with a whisper, a dare passed down between children like a cursed secret. Turn off the lights, stand in front of the mirror, say her name, 3 times, 13 times, depending on who told you. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. For generations, children have stepped into dark bathrooms to confront the mirror and something behind it. A game, they say. Just a game. But if that's true, why do so many of us still remember the cold sweat, the racing pulse, the moment that we thought, just maybe, we saw something move that wasn't our own reflection? Because Bloody Mary isn't just a prank, she's a ritual. A myth that adapts with each retelling, a ghost who wears the mask of our fears. Tonight on Noir Frequency, we're stepping through that mirror. We'll trace her shadows from Victorian divination to 90s schoolyard lore, from mirror illusions to symbolic blood, from playgrounds in Chicago to school bathrooms in Tokyo. So the question isn't just who is Bloody Mary, it's also what are we summoning when we call her name? Before Bloody Mary appeared in a bathroom mirror, people were already speaking into glass, asking it to show them what they couldn't see. Her ritual isn't new, it's an echo. In ancient Greece, priests practiced catoptromancy, divination through mirrors, gazing into polished bronze to receive visions from the gods. The Romans believed mirrors could trap souls, and breaking one brought 7 years of bad luck. In medieval Europe, reflective surfaces were often covered after a death to prevent the deceased spirit from becoming trapped. Later in the Renaissance, alchemists and mystics experimented with dark mirrors made of obsidian. The mirror was a portal, a liminal tool for peering into the beyond. By the 18th and 19th centuries, these esoteric practices had filtered into folk customs. In rural Britain and America, young women played mirror games in dimly lit rooms on Halloween, a night already steeped in the supernatural. One ritual involved walking backwards up a staircase, candle in hand, while peering into a hand mirror. If performed correctly, the girl would see the face of her future husband. If she saw a skull instead, it was a sign of early death. As the 20th century dawned, modernity dimmed the appetite for domestic seances and parlour divinations, but the mirror games didn't vanish, they evolved. Their setting changed from ornate drawing rooms to stark tiled bathrooms. Their purpose shifted from romance to horror, from hopes of love to fear of retribution, from solitary divination to communal dare. And that's where the Bloody Mary ritual took hold. In this new form, the mirror retained its power, but the figure within it had changed. No longer a future husband, but a vengeful woman. No longer a romantic vision, but a ghost. The ritual carried a different emotional charge now, not longing, but dread. And yet, beneath the transformation, the structure remained. A darkened space, a reflective surface, a spoken name. These are the bones of the rite, and they persist across centuries. What began as a flirtation with fate became a confrontation with fear. A ritual became a story, the story became a test. A whisper passed between children, echoing rituals long forgotten. And like all potent folklore, it spread. It survived. Because even as science rose and belief waned, the mirror still waited, and we keep returning to it. So, who is Bloody Mary? Some say Mary Tudor, England's Bloody Queen. burned Protestants and left her name soaked in fire. She ruled during a time of violent religious upheaval, and her legacy became stained by the blood of those she persecuted. But her historical reign ended long before the ritual emerged, and there's no record of her as a spectral presence. Others invoke Mary Worth, a name that floats through contradictory folk tales. She's described as a witch, a recluse, a child snatcher, or a woman whose pride in her appearance led to supernatural punishment. The stories rarely agree, and that's part of the point. Mary Worth never needed to be real to be remembered. She exists in fragments, composite fears stitched together and passed on. Elizabeth Bathory is another candidate, the infamous Blood Countess of Hungary, said to have murdered hundreds of girls, bathing in their blood to remain young. Though her name is not Mary, her tale echoes the themes of power, vanity, and feminine transgression. Her story bleeds into the myth. In rural American legends, Mary is a local girl. She dies in front of a pane of glass, or she vanishes and is said to haunt the bathroom where she was last seen. Some say she was disfigured and returns to punish those who gaze too long. These tales are modern, localized, and anonymous, and that anonymity makes her portable. In some versions she becomes a corrupted prayer, Hail Mary turned horror. In others she's a scapegoat, blamed for miscarriages, for disobedience, and for wandering alone. She becomes a cautionary figure, and that's key. The deeper you look, the more her identity dissolves. Folklorists have called her an open-ended archetype, a name like a shell waiting to be filled with whatever fears a culture needs to name. The ghost is often feminine, often wronged, often violent, but above all she is summoned by crossing a line. She watches, she returns, she breaks through. What unites these variations isn't biographical detail but thematic resonance. The consequences of vanity, the fear of unchecked beauty, the discomfort with female agency. Mary is punished for looking, for being looked at, or for daring to appear. And the invocation ritual itself, performed largely by young girls, says something profound. This is not a story told about them, it's a story they tell to each other. A whisper passed in secret, enacted without adult supervision. A shared defiance. Some scholars argue Bloody Mary functions as a kind of symbolic gatekeeper. The ritual occurs just as children are beginning to understand their own boundaries, their bodies, their identities, their fears. Mary becomes the figure who guards that threshold, not merely to scare but to challenge. And yet she's not just a regulator, she's also a rebel. Once called, she arrives, she asserts her presence. She does not remain passive, she acts. In this light, Bloody Mary becomes a figure of dangerous agency. She punishes, yes, but she is also powerful, seen by those who seek her, answering when invoked. Not every version speaks of blood, and not every tale ends in terror. But all of them hinge on the same premise. You say a name, and you risk the consequence. Because Bloody Mary is not just a character, she's an invitation to trespass, to remember, to ask what it means to be seen, and to see what answers back. So what happens when we say her name? The ritual is deceptively simple. You step into a darkened bathroom, light a candle, and face the glass. You chant her name, 3 times or 13 depending on the version. Sometimes you spin, sometimes you whisper, "Are you there, Mary?" And then you wait. What comes next is unpredictable. Some say she appears, her face bloodied, her eyes hollow. Some feel her hand reaching through. Others glimpse their own face twisted into something unrecognisable. Often nothing happens at all, but the silence itself becomes charged, the air too still, and the fear lives in the waiting. And the ritual is rarely done alone. It's a group act, a shared challenge. Children gathered at sleepovers or in school bathrooms, daring each other to perform the steps. The chosen one steps up and others hover behind, whispering, watching. There's tension, anticipation, and a hush. And after, it doesn't matter what was seen, the story begins to grow. Well, these rites aren't unique to the United States and United Kingdom. In Brazil, children tell stories of a ghostly blonde woman who appears in bathroom mirrors, especially at school. She is sometimes linked to vanity, sometimes to tragedy, but always summoned in the dark. In Japan, there's Hanako-san, a young girl said to haunt school restrooms. You knock 3 times on the stool and ask, "Are you there, Hanako-san?" And if she answers, beware. Her origin stories vary: wartime trauma, bullying, suicide. But the structure remains a name, a call, a risk. In Russia, children summon the Queen of Spades by drawing symbols on a mirror with lipstick and repeating her name. She's said to reveal visions or bring doom. In Spain, the ghost is Veronica, a girl killed during a séance. Say her name and she might return. In each of these, the formula is familiar: repetition, invocation, a liminal space. Bathrooms matter here. They're transitional spaces, private yet public, mundane yet charged with vulnerability. Places where transformation happens. For children, especially girls, they are often one of the few spaces unsupervised by adults. A place to test bravery, to flirt with mystery. And these games are not new. They follow the logic of ancient ritual. A set of steps, a sacred space, a consequence. What appears is almost beside the point. The act of doing it, the build-up, the adrenaline, the performance, is the rite. These stories then function as initiation. They mark the moment a child becomes aware of something more: fear, mortality, consequence. They are passed peer to peer, unsanctioned, unofficial, but deeply remembered. Folklorist Linda Day once called such rituals playful hauntings, performed to bond, to test, to feel something unexplainable. And they're adaptive. Pop culture folds into the ritual. Horror films, viral videos, memes. A kid might learn about Bloody Mary from TikTok, then bring her to a sleepover. The internet becomes another bathroom, the camera another mirror. There's something powerful about rituals that survive outside institutions. Bloody Mary isn't taught in schools or church. She's whispered. And what keeps her alive isn't fear alone, it's repetition. Story begets story. Because even when we don't see her, we still pass her on. Science offers possibilities. The Troxler effect, named after Swiss physician Ignaz Paul Vital Troxler, suggests something uncanny about human perception. When you stare at one point for too long, especially in dim light, your peripheral vision begins to fade. The brain, deprived of new stimuli, starts to erase what it deemed unimportant. The features of your face might begin to blur, dissolve, or mutate. You stop seeing what's actually there and begin seeing something else. This phenomenon deepens in the rituals conditions. Low light, silence, the heightened emotion of a dare. You're fixated on your own image, surrounded by shadows. Your body tenses, your heart races, your breath shallows. Every flicker of the candle feels like movement, every contour of your face begins to shift. Italian psychologist Giovanni Caputo observed something similar in 2010. He asked subjects to stare into a mirror for 10 interrupted minutes in a dim room. Many reported monstrous distortions. Some described unfamiliar faces, old, young, male, animalistic. Others sensed a presence. One participant cried. But it's not just biology, it's the stories we carry. If you grew up with the Bloody Mary legend, you've memorized the script, you anticipate the outcome. The brain, already primed, fills in the blanks. And in groups, the effect swells. One child gasps, the others follow. A scream and adrenaline floods the room. The experience becomes shared, the illusion becomes folklore. And soon it's not just what was seen, it's what was remembered. Science doesn't erase the mystery, it reshapes it. The question shifts from is she real to why does she keep appearing even when we know she shouldn't? Perhaps the mind isn't a recorder of reality but a storyteller, one that bends and blurs, one that needs to believe. Because Bloody Mary isn't summoned despite her being imagined, maybe she appears because she is. Not from an external realm, but from within. A storm of narrative, emotion, suggestion, and fear. And in that flickering moment, what you see might not be a ghost, it might be your own reflection, transformed by the stories you carry. But that doesn't make her any less real, it only means the haunting begins inside. Bloody Mary may be fear in the mirror, but she's also transformation. Folklorist Alan Dundas proposed that the ritual may serve as a coded rite of passage, particularly among girls on the cusp of puberty. The elements: darkened room, candlelight, a repeated chant, mirror, far older ceremonial forms, not religious but sacred in their own way, not taught but transmitted. The phrase Bloody Mary itself in this reading is not a reference to a historical figure but to blood. The blood of adolescence, the blood that marks a transition. That introduces a young person to mortality, to change, to adult attention, and to social consequence. In this context, Bloody Mary becomes a symbol of the first period. She's what looms before the change and what waits in the mirror when the body begins to speak in unfamiliar ways. The ritual often arises around ages 9 to 12, when sleepovers and whispered conversations start to carry a different weight. When stories told in the dark aren't just entertainment but preparation. Bloody Mary becomes a stand-in for all that isn't yet spoken aloud. Viewed through the symbolic lens, Bloody Mary is not just a ghost, she's a threshold. A figure who exists at the edge of safety, whose presence marks a shift in identity. She demands to be seen, to be called, to be faced. That's why the ritual endures, not because it always works, but because the act of doing it matters. The courage it takes to say the name, to stand still, to look without flinching. Even if nothing appears, the moment leaves an imprint. This is the secret of folklore. It survives not by proving itself true, but by remaining emotionally necessary. Bloody Mary offers a frame for exploring fear, identity and power. Especially feminine power, the kind that's often deemed dangerous or taboo or both. She is punished for being seen, and yet she comes when called. There's defiance in that. So perhaps she's not just a warning, perhaps she's a challenge, an invitation to ask, what do you fear in yourself? And what might happen if you meet it head on? Because at its heart, Bloody Mary is less about summoning something from beyond, and more about standing on the edge of change and saying yes. Bloody Mary doesn't exist to be proven, she exists to be summoned. If this episode made you think, question or feel a little less alone, consider supporting Noir Frequency. Join the Patreon for early access, bonus content and a completely ad-free feed. Every member helps keep the signal strong. Or you can visit Noir Frequency to pick up some merch, designed for the strange, the curious, and the quietly haunted. And if you're not ready to dive deeper just yet, just a like, a share, or subscribing to the channel helps just as much. Pass it on to someone else who might need it. Thanks for being here.